Welcome once again to the thoughts that are running across my heart and in my head on this very sacred day. It is Good Friday. What a name, Good Friday, the day on which Jesus, some 2,000 years ago almost, was crucified on Golgotha by the Empire of Rome. And how in the world one calls that good, I do not know. We all know. It's good for the most important of reasons. It fulfills what I think Paul captures it well in Romans 9 through 11 when he talks about how, and he's wrestling with this idea, how is it that Israel, the people chosen of God, are not responding to Yeshua, the Messiah, and to the way in which he focused his energy and time and confrontation, if you will, while he was on the earth, and the love of which he gave everyone, including his enemies, Rome. And what do you do with that? You end up going to a cross, because love is offensive at many, many, many levels, and certainly became a threat to the leadership of the church of his day, and ultimately to Rome itself, in terms of the popularity of the moment of a potential Maccabean rebellion during the special holy days of Easter. In any event, so my mind today has gone back to Egypt, and I'll come back to Romans here in a second, but I want to start with the text that I'm reading from. It's entitled Divine Love. It's out of the book of Hosea, and it says, "When Israel was a child, I loved him, and out of Egypt I called my son. The more I called them, the further they went away from me. They kept sacrificing to the Baals, and they burned incense to idols. Yet it was I who taught Ephraim to walk. I took them up in my arms, but they did not know that I healed them. I led them with bands of human kindness, with cords of love. I treated them like those who lift infants to their cheeks." Wow, take that in. "I bent down to them, and I fed them." So Paul, reflecting on that and 100 other texts, says, how is it Israel still doesn't get it in Yeshua? He makes a couple of incredible statements in the 11th chapter, as he's wrestling with that throughout the 9th through the beginning of chapter 12. And he says two things that are powerful in chapter 11. One is that call of God, the election of God, is certain and cannot be done away with. God's heart does not change in love. And then he makes an extraordinary insight, and that is that Israel's rejection of the Messiah opened God's arms wide to the whole world. That it was their rejection that made salvation, the coming alive to our humanity and all of its purposes, the healing of this planet, possible for all those who were outside the story. Then he tells the church not to become arrogant, because we are not naturally part of that vine that he had spoken with the disciples the night before he was crucified. We're cut in. We're unnatural. We're born unnaturally. He says, so don't get arrogant, because God is not done with Israel. And then he makes the most extraordinary statement at the end, that though Israel's rejection has brought salvation to the whole world, it will be the world's response that brings salvation back to Israel. And finally he says, and this is what I just can never get away from, he says, I have turned all humankind, all women, all men, over to disobedience, so that I may have mercy on them all. Wow. That's why it's Good Friday. It's the day of betrayal. It's the day where we identify with the betrayers and with Jesus' response, hopefully. That's the final purpose of it. And so I think back over those deals, and I touched on it in yesterday's devotional as it relates to Judas, just to remind you that Jesus treated Judas with incredible tenderness. He gave him the place to his left at the table of the 12 in the Last Supper. And the table to the left, not the right as it is in Western cultures, the table to the left in that culture was the place of highest honor. It was the place where you wanted to especially underline, this person is important to me. Then, as the moment of betrayal came closer, Jesus said to Judas, if you must do what you're going to do, get it done. You can imagine how hard that was for Jesus. Who knows what ultimately it was in the mind of Judas. I think William Barclay, who was one of the people who was the background theologian behind the movie Jesus of Nazareth, my favorite, because Jesus isn't a stick figure, because the disciples aren't stick figures. They actually have character, and they're responding, and the stories come alive in context. But he argues that Judas was simply trying to force his interpretation of Yeshua's, of his model of what that meant, to be free from Roman domination upon the Jewish community, and he was forcing Jesus' hand in their hand, and that was his motive. Whatever his motive is, Jesus tenderly simply said to him, if you got to do it, do it. Don't suffer any longer. Get it done. And then he tells the disciples something extraordinary. It was, I'm sure, extremely painful. One of you is going to betray me. And Peter then, of course, says, ask him, good morning, how are you today?
Good, how are you?
Doing well, thanks. It is amazing weather. I love it. So he says to him, ask the Messiah, because John the Beloved was leaning up against Jesus. Ask the Messiah, ask Yehus, who is it? And he does, and Jesus whispers to him and says, it's the one, and just I want you to see the dignity in this, it's the one whose hand I am even now reaching out to dip into the food. And so John would have become aware immediately that it was Judas. From John's writings, I suspect he may have already suspected that. But he doesn't announce it, and we know that clearly because Luke tells us, and Matthew I think maybe it tells us that not Luke, that the other disciples thought that he was leaving to go feed the poor. And then when the betrayal comes later that night, how does he respond? He simply says, Judas, you betray me with a kiss? A last attempt to reach out. Now Peter's betrayal was different. One of the things I think Peter gets I think we don't understand Peter. We see him as one who failed in his promise. He didn't. He was totally prepared to die for Jesus, and he takes up the sword against the people who'd come, and he cuts off the ear of one of the party that are coming to arrest Jesus. So it's not a matter of courage for Peter. It was a matter of vision. What he wasn't prepared to do was die Jesus' kind of loving death. And so Jesus says, put away your swords. This is not, have I come to rule in that way? Have I come to just be one more power center in the earth? No. And then Jesus spares all of them and they run. All of the disciples run. All the disciples at that point betray. Peter actually is one who hangs around and hangs close. His betrayal is worse because he's closer to the story, because at the end he denies Jesus 3 times, as Jesus said he would. But he's close enough to deny him. The others aren't even close enough, except John, who never betrays Jesus. He's with him to the end, and with his mother. And as his mother is holding Jesus at the bottom after the death in her arms, and in that she is now holding the one in whom all the sins and wounds of humankind passed forward forever are in her arms. Changed my relationship to women when I realized that she held my sins in her arms. In any event, Jesus' response to Peter was incredible. You'll remember when the foot washing, Peter said, well, you can't wash my feet, arrogantly. And then Jesus says, I must, if you want to be a part of me. And this says, wash my whole body. And Jesus, rather flippantly and almost in humor, says, Peter, you're clean because you know my word. I need only to wash your feet. And that was an incredible moment. But what was really incredible is he told him he was going to deny him, but then he says to him, Peter, I've prayed for you. Your denial will not be the end. I have prayed for you, and after you have been restored, feed my sheep. I remember that often. This is the hardest, loneliest time in my life in terms of the intimacy with God. But it is a beautiful time in terms of the restoration of my body and mind. I've lost 25 pounds in the last year and a half, and that by a gift from God in terms of dieting. And my mind is beginning to come back to some kind of mental health, and the work of restoration that God has given me to do in the building you can see in the corner back there, and in, frankly, the parsonage and all of it, and has been a part of that, but also a part of the stress. But my spirit is dead and has been for several years. And my hope is Peter. My hope is Jesus and the way he relates to Peter. So in all of these stories, and the reason I start with Egypt, the reason it's important, and the reason that Jesus went to Egypt as an exile, to remind us, number one, that the story is about it's an exilic story. It's not made for the people who are at the top of the heap. The American modern Pax Americana for the whole world, as important as we may be to the world, the truth is we frame the lens in which we look on Scripture as radically upside down, because the Jewish community and those who are in the third world countries, etc., look at it far more clearly and with clear eyes than we do. Jesus went to Egypt to be an immigrant, so that out of Egypt, the place of the original struggle, freedom would come. It was an incredible moment. And Hosea is picking that up in Hosea chapter 11. You need to read that whole chapter. We'll end with a part of it in just a moment. But that's critical in terms of the text. Because you see, as Israel came out of Egypt, they came to the mountain. God had already graciously delivered them, fed them, given them tremendous miracles. And the first time that Moses goes up in the mountain seeking the knowledge and awareness of God, what happens? He comes down and they're partying, and they've built an image to Ptah, the gods, and they're highly, overly destroying everything that they've been taught. They've returned to Egypt in their heart. Egypt never actually left, but they've gone home, and not to the home God intended. And so in that story, God tells Moses that he's leaving them. First he tells him he's going to destroy them, and Moses pleads and makes the first pleas, don't blot them out. If you blot them out, take me. That's a Christ moment. That's where we get the first image, the second image of Christ. Abraham's before that, in the book, in God's developing of the story. And then God says, okay, I'll go with you, but I'll send my angel, and you'll succeed. You'll have a certain kind of human freedom, but I'm not going to be with you, because if I'm with you, I permeate everything, and at the end, you're going to destroy yourselves. It's just the way of things. Your wounds, your arrogance will self-destruct, and the closer I am to you, the more quickly that will come, etc. And Moses then asked for two other favors. One, that he might know God's will, God's ways, so that he might walk with God. And then finally, he wanted to see God's glory, his presence. And Moses really becomes Christ to us. And so Christ tonight is going to be on a cross where God drinks deeply of our wounds and fulfills the promise to Israel. He goes into each of our Egypts, into the center of our betrayals, and he owns them as his own. He has integrity, and in a sense he's also making apology, in the sense that he's saying, I know what I created, and I know the potential of destruction that humans would go through as they turned away from love. I will have integrity with you. I will walk that journey with you. And it's a dialogue journey that God has entered. It's compelling because it draws us back out of Egypt, out of our Egypts. God's gone to Egypt, and he's done so for each of us who have betrayed. Listen to this text now as it closes out in the book of Hosea. And I'm going to drop down now to verse 9. I won't, verse 8. How can I give you up, Ephraim? And this is after God is ranting through the prophet and saying, I'm done with you. And then God changes his mind because of the deeper love. He says, how can I give you up, Ephraim? How can I hand you over, Israel? How can I make you like Admah? How can I treat you like Zeboam? My heart winces within me. My compassion grows warmer and tender. I won't act on the heat of my anger. I won't return to destroy Ephraim, for I am God and not a human being, the Holy One in your midst. I won't come in harsh judgment. They will walk after the Lord, who roars like a lion. When he roars, his children will come trembling from the west. They will come trembling like a bird and like a dove from the land of Assyria, and I will return them to their home, says the Lord. Ephraim, surrounded with lies, the house of Israel with faithless acts, but Judah will still walk with God and is faithful to the Holy One. So, Paul, reflecting all that, says, God has turned all of humanity over to rebellion, over to wherever our hearts and imaginations takes us when God is not forming that heart. And he's done it so that he may have mercy on us all. And then an ancient hymn of the church is spoken in that text where God says, where the text says, oh, the mercies of God, how unfathomable they are. And what you see it is in the way God responds to the betrayers, including me, including you. Okay, Jack, come here, and including my dog, and keep hope. God is with us. He's not abandoned America because we kicked him out of some kind of school. God's with us in it, and the things that our wounds create and the sicknesses that come our way, God will be with us in that, ever doing what he does best, covering us with mercy. May God bless you on this horrible Good Friday.